everybody, and welcome to a video talking about everything congressional debate. I'm going to be making a series of 15 videos breaking down each individual segment that I think is most relevant for you to know as a competitor within Congress. But this video is just the introduction. So if you haven't seen a round of Congress, or if you're not familiar with the format, or if you're a new coach, parent, judge, something along those lines, and just don't know the basics, this is the video for you. If you do know the basics, I highly suggest skipping this video. A lot of it's going to be redundant information, and you will be better benefited by other videos within the series, such as stuff going over questions, stuff going over amendments and parliamentary procedure, how to cater your speech towards judges, how to construct different types of speeches, and so on and so forth. Within this video, though, we're just going to be going over the basics. So if that sounds right for you, fantastic. I hope that you get some information that you've been looking for. The gist of Congress, or congressional debate, is a student mock version of the actual U.S. Congress. There's a House and a Senate, much like the House and Senate, wherein there are representatives or senators, respectively. Senators and representatives are members or legislators. All of those names refer to the same competitive students within a chamber. Chambers generally are comprised of 12 to 20 individuals. Usually it's smaller chambers if you're going to be going to an online tournament. Larger chambers are possible, but they are harder to manage, especially on different virtual formats. So generally you'll be between 12 and 16 while online, and 16 to 24 while in person. Also within your chamber, there's going to be a set of scorers. These scorers are comprised of judges and parliamentarians. There's only one parliamentarian per chamber, and that person is an adult who is also a judge who is in charge of ranking every single student 1 through the bottom of the list. The judges, on the other hand, rank 1 through 8 and drop everyone else at a 9. The student legislators in the chamber take turns speaking on pieces of legislation. Legislation is handed out by the tournament officials or those running the tournament prior to the competition, so that student competitors and teams have time to read over the legislation, come up with some arguments, and create speeches on the affirmation in favor and negation against the legislation. Once you're in the session, then the presiding officer, who is an elected student member, is going to be nominating agendas, seeing which agenda nomination has the most votes, and then running through the session in the order of the agenda nominated. You start first always on the affirmation and then go to the negation, speak aff, neg, all the way down the flow until either you run out of time on a piece of legislation or debate is exhausted. Congress can be broken into 3 sections and 3 stages of competition. The first is the preparatory, the second is the caucusing, and the third is the session. Within the preparatory part of competition, that's when student-written legislation is submitted and accepted to a published docket. Debaters then research the legislation, prepare arguments in favor, affirmation, or against, negation, the bill. Arguments are compiled into speeches, and competitors show up to tournament on tournament day with as many speeches prepped as you possibly can, but a lot of times you don't have time to prep the full docket, as there are anywhere from 5 to 50 pieces of legislation. Right before your chamber starts, there's going to be this caucusing or lobbying period in a common space where competitors are able to meet. That's generally where you will say that you're running for presiding officer, if that's something you're interested in. And if you're not interested in running for PO, then generally you're going to be going over different agenda nominations or different agenda ideas to try and figure out the order of legislation you'll be debating within the session. The parliamentarian, right before the chamber starts, so everyone's in the chamber, everyone's in the room, everyone's getting ready, sitting down, the parliamentarian then takes control and opens the floor for the presiding officer nomination. This really is the beginning of stuff happening within the chamber, but every once in a while you'll still have some people moving in and out, or judges coming in and out, tabs sorting themselves out, but it's the soft launch of the chamber. As soon as that presiding officer has been nominated, the chamber has begun. At that point, the presiding officer is going to look for agenda nominations and seek an agenda with majority of the members present. The agenda that has the majority of members present voting in favor of debating the order of legislation on that agenda list, so the items in that order, is going to be the one that is adopted for the session, and then the session begins. So The floor will open for debate on the first piece of legislation. The presiding officer will call first for an authorship, second for a sponsorship, and the sponsorship is that first affirmative speech. So you'll have someone going up for an affirmation speech for the author or sponsor, and then after that has been done, you'll have 2 minutes of questioning, then the first negation, 2 minutes of questioning, then back to the affirmation, and from here on out, we do 1 minute of questioning after each speech, going AFNEG, AFNEG, AFNEG. Every once in a while, you'll break cycle. That means that the presiding officer, the person in charge of electing speakers and nominating people to do stuff, come to the floor within the chamber, will be asking for the speech that is due on the flow. So you just had a negation, you're asking for an affirmation, but there aren't any more affirmative speeches. In that instance, the presiding officer will break cycle and ask then for another negative speech to see if there are any other speeches in the chamber. If there are no speakers or no persons indicating that they wish to speak on the affirmation or the negation, the presiding officer will ask the chamber if they are ready for the question. The question is a main motion, and that is the motion to move previous question, which means that you are done with debate on a certain item and that you're moving into voting procedure. After the motion to move previous question has been passed, you vote on the legislation, and then, depending on whether you have more items of legislation and more times within the session, you will either move into the next legislative item on the agenda or adjourn the session with a different motion. So those are the stages. First, prep, everything before, caucusing, trying to figure out what's going to happen during, the parliamentarian trying to adopt the presiding officer into the chair, and then the actual session where the floor opens and debate occurs. Next, who are the members of the chamber? You've been hearing me throw around a lot of names, and there are many names for the same positions within a chamber that kind of vary regionally. So pay attention to what I'm saying and to which members are going to be referred to as who, because it changes region to region, tournament to tournament, session to session even. One thing to note, it is in your interest not to use any gendered terms if you can avoid it. In a chamber, you're going to have representatives, members, legislators, and senators. These all refer to the speakers in the chamber. Those are all the people within the chamber who you are competing against. You're also competing against the presiding officer. Remember that presiding officer, sometimes called the PO, chair, president, madam president, is an elected student member of the chamber tasked with keeping everything in order as the chamber elapses. So they're calling speaking order, questioning order, dealing with any motions or points of information, privilege that come up. Anything dealing with parliamentary procedure, it is the presiding officer's primary responsibility to manage and keep the chamber moving efficiently. If they fail in their job, that is when the parliamentarian, also called the parley, steps in. Parliamentarians are a type of judge. They work along with the other judges, all of which are called scorers, to determine ranks within the round and to write you ballots. A lot of times you'll get speaker scores. In Minnesota, that would either be on like a 1 through 6 or 1 through 8 scale. You will get speaker scores for each speech and then an overall rank as well. That changes tournament to tournament. I competed mostly within Minnesota, and then once the online season started, I was doing pretty much every weekend on the national circuit. And a lot of times judges, especially parent judges, will mess up judging conventions. So if you think there's a mistake on your ballot, reach out to your coach, reach out to the tournament kind of ASAP so that it doesn't impact you moving forward. So yeah, that's everyone. You have all your speaking members, presiding officer, PO, parliamentarian, and your judges. You'll also have tab staff. They are available to you if you need them, but generally we try to leave the tab staff alone. They're the tabulation staff and are in charge of doing everything administrative of the tournament. That's the tournament director, those figuring out chambers, the rooms that you're going into. If it's online, that's your tech support. So be kind to the tab staff and make sure that if you can deal with something by yourself, do. If you do need help though, ask. All right, let's talk about legislation. Legislation comes in 3 formats: constitutional amendments, bills, and resolutions. Constitutional amendments are exactly how they sound. They amend the Constitution. In order to pass a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 majority to vote in favor of the constitutional amendment. A lot of POs mess that up. Make sure that you do it correctly. Bills and resolutions are used interchangeably to describe legislation, but they're very different, and if you use them interchangeably, you're doing it incorrectly. Bills have a couple different sections that are going to explain exactly what it is that is changing if the bill is passed. Section 1 is going to be giving an overview. 2 is going to be your definition and further explanation. 3 is going to be going into a little bit more detail about the enforcement and the enacting agencies. 4 is your time frame. 5 is your declaration null void, meaning that all laws in conflict with that legislation are null and void once it is passed. That's establishing a law, changing one, or introducing a new policy that has enforcement. A resolution is fundamentally different. Instead of enacting or changing an established law, it is creating a change to the way that Congress is approaching an issue, or changing the paradigm of Congress, or changing what it is that the US Congress is feeling about a way. It's like a suggestion. If a resolution is passed, the law does not change. Resolutions are cascading whereas clauses that build upon the previous clause in order to get to a final resolution that states, therefore be it resolved that the Congress here assembled that. So that's going to be where that resolution comes in, and what it actually you're debating is going to be coming into play. So pay attention to that format versus the bill format. They're different. They're used differently. Bills create laws, resolutions create suggestions. All right, last thing, how a chamber actually is run. You're going to start by the parliamentarian opening the chamber and the members of the chamber electing a PO by nomination and then by majority vote. You need a majority in order to be elected. The PO then entertains motions and agenda nominations, seeking, again, a majority of the members present. And then once that agenda has been adopted for the session, the floor opens for debate on each policy, each legislative item, on the order that they were nominated in the agenda. Speakers then take turns on the affirmation, for, or negation against the legislation, followed by questions by the chamber. The first layer of debate, that first cycle, the first affirmative and first negative speech, will have 2 minutes of questioning following. Everything else is just going to have 1 minute of questioning. Be aware of that. Once time has elapsed and debate is exhausted, the chamber moves on to the next piece of legislation on the agenda by doing a motion to move previous question, which means you're going to be closing that question, closing the legislative item, voting on that item, then moving on to the next. The session ends when time has elapsed or debate on all items has been exhausted. At that point, the presiding officer is going to relinquish the chair and say, "Thank you everybody so much for letting me preside for this session. Once again, my name was Representative Smith. I am a competitive member, and if you would like to vote for me or think that I did a good job within this session, please reflect that opinion within the ballots." So it's just like the little spiel people go through. Note that the parliamentarian and presiding officer are tasked with upholding parliamentary procedure throughout the chamber. Parliamentary procedure is like the foundation of all Congress. If you have a chance to read Adam Jacoby's NSDA guide of all the parliamentary procedure and the Congressional debate guide, do that. It's been updated a couple times since 2014. Very helpful information. The 2021 version was a slideshow, so coaches, if you're looking for a format that's easier to give to your kiddos than just like a, 13, 16-page document, that I highly recommend. If you are a particularly precocious student and want to learn a little bit more about presiding officership and parliamentary procedure, read Robert's Rules of Order. It's 170 pages. It's worth your time, especially if you really want to understand the mechanics of everything happening behind a round of Congress. All right, that was everything that we needed to cover. We went over the gist of congressional debate, different members of the chamber, different formats of legislation, and how a chamber is run. This was the introductory video to congressional debate, and it's going to be the beginning of many that will go more into focus on all the different elements that I was talking about. If you have requests for stuff that you really want to know more about, let me know. My email will be down below. That's the easiest way to reach me. I can't promise I'm going to be paying attention to YouTube. I'm doing this because I'm enjoying it, so it kind of is going to be a bit haphazardly done. It's a learning curve. I'm figuring it out. I hope that you found this useful and that you stick around to learn a little bit more. Tell me what you need and I will try and make it available for you, whether that is resources, videos, questions being answered, or whatever that may be. Until the next time, I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic day. Goodbye. Thank you very much.